we'll go ahead and move forward. I'm just going to give you a couple of facts about the IGF to set the context for the discussion. So as David mentioned, this was the first IGF after the WSIS +10 review process. So as part of that, in the main sessions as well as in the themes of the workshops, of which there were more than 200, there were discussions with respect to the future of the Internet Governance Forum, and also we start to see a lot of the IGF growth and acceptance as a global multi-stakeholder platform and discussion for IG. And as a result of that, we saw a lot more government showing up as part of the discussion. This is still an issue, but that's something that perhaps Barbara can talk about a little bit further. With respect to the alignment of the SDG to the WSIS +10 process, we also saw expansion of the discussion at the IGF to include issues such as human rights, cybersecurity, as well as investment and financing, but under the context of ICT for development. So with that, as I'll turn that over to the discussants. I'd like to do a quick introduction. We'll start with Liesl Clance from the U.S. Department of State. From the government perspective, we'll follow up with Barbara Warner from the U.S. Council for International Business. From the business perspective, a little bit of the gender perspective. We'll then go to Andrew Mack from AM Global Consulting, who will be addressing from the development perspective. And then Dustin Phillips from ICANN Wiki for the youth perspective. And then we'll end with Marilyn Kate, who will speak in general and also about the effort that she's been putting forward on the NRIs, which is really addressing how to make the discussion a lot more inclusive of the developing countries. Great, and we'll start with you.
Hey, good morning, everybody, and hopefully you can hear us online. It's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations for kicking off the new year with this debrief session. As both David and Carolyn have alluded to, the IGF in Mexico took place really after a historic period between IGF 2015 and IGF in 2016. So since we met in Chicago, for example, we did conclude the 10-year review of the WSIS that extended the IGF for 10 years and another 10 years, and the Internet community completed the transition of Diana stewardship to the multi-stakeholder community. At the same time, the international community has continued the very important work of utilizing the Internet and other ICTs as catalysts and drivers for sustainable development, as Carolyn mentioned, understanding and addressing the economic and social implications of the digital, what we've been calling the digital revolution, and addressing security threats while remaining committed to the protection and promotion of human rights and the fundamental freedoms. So, for fear of repeating our hosts, it is a pivotal point in the history of Internet governance, so somewhere the multi-stakeholder approach is proven and successful. And work by the diverse group of stakeholders is underway to ensure its benefits reach every country, community, and individual around the world. So this trend toward multi-stakeholder governance is no accident. It's because people in this room and people around the world are committed to the process and believe that the internet should be open to everyone and for the benefit of everyone. So that's sort of our going in proposition. Challenges remain, though, as a lot of work needs to be done. There are still too many people offline and uncertainty about security online. There are too many governments that still use security fears to restrict access to the internet or the freedoms that it should provide for them to freely assemble and to express themselves online. So the fundamental challenge, as we continue to realize the promise that the internet offers, is how to address all these issues in tandem, not just one or a few of them, since they are all interconnected. For example, access does not matter if people can't use it in a productive manner. Security can become counterproductive if it's oppressive or restricts human rights. And development that provides access, security, openness, and more needs the commitment of the entire community, not just commitments by government. The U.S. strongly believes that to accomplish these goals, we must all remain committed to and practice the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance, which is the best way, really the only way we think, we can simultaneously provide quality access, improve security, protect human rights, and improve digital literacy. So it's a multifaceted challenge. so that we can capture all the benefits the digital revolution has. It's also the only way to tap the power of the internet and the innovative spirit it embodies as a catalyst and a driver to achieve the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Through the 2030 Agenda, as Carolyn noted, UN member states adopted a development framework model, which is already the foundation of the internet governance since the internet's inception. Namely, that all stakeholders, including governments, industry, NGOs, but also individual innovators, users, and activists, are essential to harness its full potential. So the 2030 Agenda leans heavily on public-private partnerships. It welcomes the commitment and experts of non-government stakeholders and encourages the participation of all people, including those most impacted by its decisions. So we think the internet and its multi-stakeholder model of governance are natural partners for the 2030 Agenda. So just as the 2030 Agenda is moving from commitments to action, as it says, so should the internet community remain committed to action, not just agreements. So now that we have achieved with this review and the IANA transition, we must ensure that those and other internet governance-related processes meet the promise of transparency and accountability, where more stakeholders have a seat at the table, where we focus on advancing a global internet and closing the digital divide within and between countries, and where we remain unwavering in our commitment to the protection of human rights. So we appreciate the work of the MAG and by the community this year to ensure that the IGF in Mexico lived up to that standard and continues to do so over the coming years. We also believe, and it's another example, that the work of the Freedom Online Coalition, for example, embraces and leverages a multi-stakeholder approach. While it's a coalition of governments, the FOC continues to engage stakeholders in all its work, the annual conference, its working groups, and its outputs. For example, at the FOC conference in San Jose in October, my boss, Chris Kaner, announced the FOC's decision to issue a joint statement in consultation with stakeholders, denouncing government efforts to disrupt internet and mobile services, essentially shutting down the internet. The FOC is looking to host its 2017 event on the margins of the Stockholm Internet Forum in May of 2017, and there they plan to release their updated terms of reference, which includes strengthening the multi-stakeholder participation in the coalition. After that sort of general overview about the connection between internet governance, multi-stakeholder models, with this review and things like that, let me get a little bit more specific about the IGF in Mexico and some observations. First, I'm really glad that Carolyn asked me to speak briefly about the main session on shaping the future of internet governance. Not just because I was one of the MAG co-organizers of the session, but really because it was a prime example of how the IGF is fueled bottom up. It was a workshop proposal it started as a workshop proposal like any other. That as a MAG member, I was dutifully evaluating at some ungodly hour in the middle of the night for selection. The idea of the proposal really struck me as something that would A, draw an audience, and not just because Vince Cerf was looking at it, I'm sure. B, would engender some lively discussion, and not just from the panelists, but also from the attendees of the session. And C, would provide a platform for the growing rich engagement and contribution from youth participants in the IGF, and not just those that have participated in Shul Pessoa, for example, but clearly those. So I had a harebrained idea to propose it as a main session. Clearly, I wasn't the only one in the MAG that thought it was an interesting idea, because from the MAG selection process, it ended up as number 5. So I thought it really showed that ideas from the community can become showcased in a way. In the program, trade and human rights, same thing. Multiple workshop proposals bubbling to the surface and becoming showcased in the session. So how did it go? Well, it landed on the last day of the IGF, which is typically a slower day, as people tend to filter out to head home, but I honestly don't think we suffered for that at all. We had a fantastic panel of speakers and a great number of attendees, and it really allowed the discussion of the proceedings during the week to filter into the conversation. And importantly, it really was a conversation. The format was innovative for a main session, or any session really, in that it had a lively debate, dialogue between pairs of a youth representative and a pioneer representative on various aspects of internet governance. For example, Grace Abdulhamid of NTIA, who's 24, went toe-to-toe with Vince Cerf, who's not. Florian Daniel parried with Henriette Esterhausen, who refused to be called the mother of internet governance, but she was game for the game plan anyway. So it was innovative in that sense, and it's great to be able to show. So she noted to me that her biggest takeaway from the session was that it brought the conversation about youth to the forefront, and some of the youth representatives who have been working on getting youth involved for a while gave them a nice little boost. So harebrained idea sort of worked out in the end. But it was a really good workshop proposal, and they did all the work. So looking at the IGF overall, in Mexico overall, though, a few additional thoughts. The U.S. government had 28 people there, including people from our Mexico City and Guadalajara post. So once again, we had a good showing, we think, of senior and expert level participants. And really expert people that participated in the workshops. Department of Commerce's Commercial and Development Program once again brought representatives from Afghanistan and Pakistan to the IGF, helping to contribute to the various efforts to help defray costs for people to attend, particularly from developing countries. And I'd like to highlight or repeat, sorry to do so, but what Assistant Secretary Strickling said in his opening session remarks. Throughout this week in Guadalajara, as you engage in discussions with different stakeholders from around the world, consider how you can organize multi-stakeholder approaches back in home in your own community. Consider how you can join with other stakeholders regionally, globally, to demonstrate the value of the multi-stakeholder model and continue to engage the IGF going forward. We have 9 more years to look forward to continue to expand participation, enrich the dialogue, and indeed demonstrate the power of the system for all. So that's why we go. That's why we engage, and that's why we think the IGF is important. Each year of the IGF, specific topics seem to be timely. One of the IGF's strengths, by the way, is that it can capture those topics in the program at their initial or peak moments. There have been some notable ones. I don't know, surveillance maybe. This year, the ones we noted that rose to the surface were gender, more so than in previous years, frankly, Internet of Things, and trade. And we noted, as David mentioned in his introduction, that there were comments in several workshops about anti-globalization concerns, particularly in discussions and Q&A and sessions that we thought was an interesting thread and something to watch going forward. I've already talked about youth participation somewhat, but that continues to grow, which we think is great. Now, according to the chairman's summary, I have to take a little umbrage because according to the chairman's summary, there were over 200 participants, yes, but from 123 countries. So let's get past that. I don't know if the stats are better.
I took that from
the participants list or something?
no, I took that from the secretary.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, okay. So we'll see. But notably on government participation, though, there were government representatives at least registered as on-site delegates from 80 countries and from every region. So while we can always encourage more government participation, I think that's a pretty great number. And if you look at the list, it's quite diverse, and that was definitely represented in the sessions throughout the week. Once again, we as the U.S. government contingent were able to leverage the convening nature of the IGF to engage with global industry, civil society, government counterparts, and parliamentarians on the margins, which we always use as a positive and we think is welcomed by the communities. The communities that the IGF fosters, but is also fueled by, including organizations or governments that have open forums, dynamic coalitions, the national and regional initiatives, they all had real estate in the program during the week. It's exhausting, but it's exhilarating as well. The FOC had an open forum, for example, as did 10 or more countries. The Dynamic Coalition's Best Practice Forum, Connecting and Empowering the Next Billion Initiative, and then NRI work was highlighted in main sessions. Regarding NRI specifically, we support them as geographically and culturally diverse contributors to global IGF discussions and promote their adoption of the core IGF principles and practices of being open, inclusive, and non-commercial, and that they work in a bottom-up process and have multi-stakeholder participation. Those are the core principles that have been around since inception and continue to support them. You know, this is my 10th IGF. I only missed Athens because I was younger than youth at the time. But since Rio, I have always been struck by the great content and great dialogue in the workshops and the collaborations that the forum engenders. And even the knowledge its convening helps to impart. You know, we collectively need to do a better job of capturing that, and kudos to you that do. I love, for example, I love the part of the IETF blog that says, I felt we learned to understand the world better in some of these discussions. I think that sums it up. So the bottom line for us is that the IGF continues to be a melting pot of ideas, engagements, discussions, debates, and collaborations that all fuel the internet governance, internet policy discussions elsewhere and throughout the year. So now that I've given my little love note to the IGF, we do know we face challenges. I'm sure others will speak about these, and I'm sure it's part of our ongoing dialogue, but I just want to make 3 notes to sort of conclude here. One, the MAG has done a great work up until now to improve its own operating processes, and it is shepherding more and more intersessional work, which is great. Oh, phew! We can still improve upon that work. Yeah. I'll start over. Yeah. But we can still improve upon the workshop proposal evaluation selection process. That work is constantly underway, and I hope will show even more progress this year. 2, we need to continue continued contributions to the IGF Trust Fund to sustain the funding for the IGF Secretariat and its work. It's a strong but skeleton crew, and with all the great intersessional work that they are asked to do more and more, and indeed to meet the calls for improvements that have come before it, they are asked to do more and more, and that stretches those resources. So we're pleased that the USG has been able to make 2 large contributions, and we continue to work on our budget request to do more in the coming years. Don't ask me to place that. We acknowledge those from other governments and the community that have and continue to make contributions, and we welcome innovative funding mechanisms that the TIE Foundation and the IGF Support Association provide for other contributors. 3, we have 9 more years of this IGF mandate, so we need a lineup of host countries to fill those spots. We are raising this question with other governments when we meet with them, and hopefully some of them will take up the notion on board and pursue it in their government and in their community. And of course, many thanks to Switzerland for hosting us December 2017, which seems like it's around the corner already. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Lisa, for the comprehensive overview of sharing some of your personal insights. It's really, really helpful, and as well as putting forward the challenges. Okay. Excuse me, thank you very much. What I'd like to focus my remarks on today are providing the perspective on the IGF value business, business participation in the IGF, and what we regard as so essential about its continuation as a forum for the discussion of internet governance issues. I'd also, like Lisa has just done, like to address some of the challenges that business has encountered in terms of expanding our participation. We are very anxious to expand the ranks of business participants in the IGF because we feel we have an important contribution to make in terms of how business in very concrete terms is endeavoring to address both the challenges and opportunities for innovation presented by the digital transformation of the economy. So let's just talk first about some of the benefits that business has for the IGF. And I would say first and foremost, and I know I'm repeating some of what Lisa said, is that we really feel that it serves as a safe haven for business engagement with government delegations or our own national government in off-the-record brainstorming, preliminary strategizing type discussions in terms of how we continue to address internet governance issues in other international organizations. The beauty of the IGF, and I know, again, forgive me if I repeat, Lisa, is that it enables that sort of informal discussion that does not result in binding outcome. That it provides an environment for business and government to come together and discuss the challenges we face and then strategize about how we can tackle those challenges. In particular, at this most recent IGF, I felt that it laid an important foundation for potential collaboration, not only with government, but with other stakeholders in terms of the internet governance challenges we face in forums going forward. In particular, I would mention developments leading up to the IT plenipotentiary meeting,
developments we see in the B20 and G20 process, and also the OECD's ambitious horizontal project on the digital transformation of the economy. Believe it or not, the IGF served as an important laboratory, if you will, for the discussion of some of these important issues. There was mention of gender. I felt very privileged that a workshop proposal that USCIB developed with co-organizers that by the way, I met in previous IGF, which goes to another benefit business finds from the IGF, and that is the importance of networking and building a useful context going forward. Looked at, we called it an Internet of Women, and realizing the Witness 2020 goal. I think an important takeaway from that, and I would underscore that in developing this proposal, the business community went to great lengths to include all stakeholders in this discussion to make sure that it was provided various perspectives, not only academic and civil society, but also from the technical community, and of course what business itself. But the key takeaway from that is that there is no silver bullet to this issue of bridging the gender digital divide, that it requires a holistic approach on many different levels, both at national and intergovernmental organizations, but also from the business community itself. Another sustainable development related goal that I thought the business community made important contributions to, and that we value the IGF as a forum to present these ideas, pertain to jobs creation and the jobs related implications of the digitalization of the economy. And the one workshop that I attended that was standing room only was on exactly this topic of the future of work in the internet economy. So I think that, again, going forward, that's an issue that is ripe for continued examination and discussion within the context of the IGF, again, where you don't have an emphasis on binding outcomes, where it enables a free discussion between all stakeholder groups. I think the business also regards the IGF as an important forum for sharing best practices and business efforts as responsible corporate citizens to help realize sustainable development. USCIB contribution to the CSTD Working Group on Enhanced Cooperation, for example, was 16 pages worth of examples of enhanced cooperation. I would say at least a third or a half of which were undertaken by the business community. So I think the IGF, again, serves as a forum for us to really creatively discuss how we're endeavoring to realize the sustainable development goals and how business is sort of endeavoring to put its money where its mouth is. Now, in terms of challenges to business participation in the IGF, and this may be a little bit not sugar-coated, but I feel it's important to raise some of these issues in terms of understanding better how we can increase participation of all stakeholders in IGF going forward, given its value as a multi-stakeholder entity. Simply getting there can often be a challenge. Not only getting to the foreign country, but also logistics on the ground. We had problems with this in Baku, in Bali. It was a challenge for many people to get there, and Joao it was a challenge for many people to get there. Here in Guadalajara, it was easier, certainly for us in the U.S. to get there, but there were, a few challenges in terms of getting to the venue. So that this can serve as a deterrent to broader participation by a wider variety of stakeholders. The second issue, and Liesl raised this, and I would echo it, is the need for funding aimed at expanding involvement across stakeholder groups. And I speak from my own experience, not only this year, but last year when I planned workshops. I had at least 3 or 4 very, very informed and promising workshop speakers have to bail on me because they couldn't secure travel funding. This year, I have ISOC to thank for covering the travel of one of my speakers on the gender panel, who is sort of done some truly groundbreaking research in Africa. So we were just thrilled that she could be able to make her contribution at the IGF. So going forward, I don't know whether this is via increased focus on building up the IGF support organization. I'm probably getting this, is that support organization or what? But again, for another one of my workshops that I sponsored this year, 3 of our speakers were underwritten by one of the corporate sponsors of the workshop. And, you know, business community wants to do what it can to enable this participation and support multi-stakeholder dialogue, but we can't shoulder the entire burden. So I think, I hope within the next year we can really think creatively about how to address the travel support issue, the travel funding support issue, so we can bring in more truly promising and new faces at the IGF that can add a fresh perspective to some of the issues that we're tackling. In terms of the workshop process, and again, I know we have a few MAG members in the room here, and I'm not going to jump on you, but the workshop process too, I think, can act as can be intimidating and act as a deterrent to expanding participation, not only from the business community, but from other stakeholders. In particular, if you endeavor to plan a workshop, basically, guys, you're looking at 6 to 8 months of nothing but headaches, plainly speaking. The deadline for submission is so early that in the intervening months, you have speakers that become unavailable, you're scrambling to get new speakers lined up, you have new issues that arise, and there isn't an appropriate window to develop a workshop that maybe addresses a cutting-edge issue. For example, this year, the whole fake news thing. You know, the workshop proposal deadline had passed, the workshops were selected, and we had no opportunity to sort of pull together even a flash session on that. So that one of my recommendations going forward is if we could somehow create a mechanism, a very narrow window, maybe 8 or 10 weeks before the IGF, to entertain cutting edge issues that might be addressed. Let's see, buzzwords and writing skills. Again, this goes to the MAG's evaluation of workshops. I truly feel, you know, I'm a writer. I've written for most of my professional life, so I just, you know, focus on my words and get done with it. But I truly fear that say, non-native English speakers may struggle with this. They may have a wonderful idea for a workshop, but because they can't put it down on paper in an engaging manner, not because they aren't smart, not because they don't have a brilliant idea, but just because of language differences, that they are either discouraged or don't get ranked maybe as high as another proposer. And then finally, let's see. As I mentioned earlier, the business community places a lot of energy, puts a lot of energy in terms of diversifying its panel of speakers to ensure all stakeholders are represented from various regions and that there is gender diversity as well among the speakers. We would encourage other stakeholder groups to approach their planning of workshops in a comparable manner. I'll just leave it at that. And then finally, extensive back end. I found this, again, this is more sort of a nitty gritty in the weeds comment for the MAG members in the room this year. In terms of making your initial workshop proposal, there was extensive back-end work that had to go into submitting that proposal in terms of getting all your biographies, your contact information, so forth and so on. And then after having gone through all that work, have some of your speakers not acknowledge the email from the IGF Secretariat, which might have unfairly suggested that you didn't have sufficient confirmed speakers lined up. So, I mean, that's a little in the weeds issue, but a frustrating one nevertheless. And again, perhaps something that might deter more active participation and submission of proposals by diverse stakeholders. Having said all that, though, I would say that the benefits are worth the problems in that, as I said, not only does the IGF provide an opportunity to expand context and develop alliances that will carry over to subsequent IGFs and create even richer discussions, but also the workshop output report, I think, makes an important substantive contribution to the IGF. I'm going to call it informal library of analysis and discussion and commentary. which I sincerely hope that someday will be curated, because I think that would be another one of my recommendations, that perhaps in the next coming years we give focus on how we can curate these volumes of just invaluable insights that are provided during the course of these workshops. Through media coverage and speaker interviews, I think the IGF helps to educate the public more broadly. What I was struck by, and maybe it was because it was pertaining to a gender issue, that immediately after my gender workshop concluded, there were 2 or 3 different media people that sort of swooped down on me and other speakers anxious for comment. This is great because it not only publicizes the IGF and the importance of this as a forum for discussion of these issues, but then it elevates the importance of internet governance as a policy issue, in my view. So why don't I just wrap it up rather than repeat some of the excellent points that Liesl has made concerning the value of continuing the IGF in the coming 9 years as a multi-stakeholder forum. I would just make a few recommendations for improvements. As I said already, I think we have to find better ways of addressing the travel support funding issue. Consider logistical challenges in selecting a host country and city. Ease the workshop development process in some way to encourage greater participation by other stakeholder groups from developing countries and new faces to the IGF process. And then finally, find a way to begin to curate the wealth of information and analysis generated by the workshop discussion. So why don't I just leave it there, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And for the MAC members in the room, I think Barbara has a good list of suggestions as well as into the IGF program.
Some of us have been saying the same thing for 3 years.
Okay. What I'm hoping is that for the other people in the room, there's sufficient benefits that Barbara and Liesl has mentioned to encourage you to continue to submit ideas and workshops, because that is exactly the value of the IGF. So with that, I'll turn to Andrew.
You want me to speak from here? Do you want to move that here? Let's use this. Let's pass this around. This way, I don't have to shout at you all. Hopefully this will. Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here, and thanks for giving me the time to get the coffee working. Excellent. I am going to start off, as you may know, our firm works with a lot with the Global South. We're a business that helps businesses work with people in emerging markets. We also do a lot of work between the business community and civil society and other non-traditional actors. And so going to IGF is a real treat for me, because it is one of the rare instances where you have this great mix at a very even level, if you will, talking about both policy, but also about some of the big issues of the day, and with people representing various countries, also youth voices, gender voices, and things like that. Since Barbara did such a good job, I'm going to only add one thing to your suggestions for the MAG and for the organizers, because I thought that was an excellent series of suggestions. And that is that I found oftentimes that I found in past IGFs, I think I've been to 9. I was actually in Athens. Yeah, I know, I'm really old.
You were a youth at the time.
I was a youth at the time, that's right, yes, exactly, just starting to shape. No, one of the things that we consistently see throughout the IGFs is that where there are topics that there's a lot of interest, there oftentimes are overlapping sessions, sometimes 2, 3, and 4 sessions. And I think we could and should do a better job of trying to harmonize them such that if we're going to do different sessions, we do different aspects of a particular topic, or that we try to capture different voices on a different topic. I oftentimes found myself saying, okay, well, I'd like to do at least one of these, and I wasn't able to pick out which was the appropriate venue. I wanted to, so that probably is my biggest thing, as well as making everything easier, making it easier to get there, making the logistics easier, making it much, much easier to offer up and participate in a panel. I think that will be a tremendous benefit, and that will be frankly something that will attract more business and more potential supporters as a way of just ensuring the quality and the support that's necessary for IGF going forward. That said, the power of IGF is still extraordinary. The offline conversations as well as the sessions in the room were extraordinary. You meet people from a lot of different places that you wouldn't otherwise. And in the particular case of IGF, you meet a lot of people from civil society that I think wouldn't find their way into other venues. So I think that this is a real strength. It leads me to believe, to mention one thing that I wanted to make sure that gets out, which is that it is clear from this, and it has been clear from other IGFs that I've been to, that business really is interested in the development agenda. Business really is interested in the development agenda and in the way in which the internet can foster that development agenda. And so I think we want to try to capture that interest. We want to capture that demand. If anything, I am seeing much more movement in the direction of business saying, hey, we know that we need to be participants in this. We know that there are opportunities for us in terms of business. We know that there are opportunities for us as people who want to operate in a good business environment. And so I see that there's some real opportunity. It came up in some of our basis meetings, but it really came up from the floor and in all of my conversations with business leaders that were there. So I picked out 5 key issues that I'd like to just really quickly touch on that were highlights for me of the IGF, and luckily for me, most of them haven't been talked about too much. Yay! Right. Okay. So here are my 5 key issues. First one was the Internet of Things. It was mentioned briefly. I saw a lot of pros and cons in the conversation around the Internet of Things. On the one hand, a couple of panelists talking about the fact that the global South, especially, are not very well prepared for the coming Internet of Things, not entirely sure what to look for, what's coming their way. On the other hand, a high level of expectation, a sense that this may be yet another technology, another approach that allows the global South to skip steps in their online development. And so on the one hand, we're not sure. On the other hand, we see it out there that there's something potentially big for us. And I made a point in one of the sessions that I attended about the idea that the global South, rather than thinking of themselves just as potentially a little bit late to the game, should be thinking of themselves potentially as an IoT superpower. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the IoT is all about grabbing lots and lots and lots of data from lots and lots and lots of people. And the one thing that we know for sure is of the soon-to-be 9 billion people on Earth, the vast majority of those from the global South, from the developing countries, the countries newest to the internet, there isn't a lot of data about them, about their tastes and preferences, about the way that they're using the internet, about the way that they're going to consume and the way that they want to consume government services and a lot of these. So think about continents like Africa. Yes, sure, partly as takers in the initial instance, but also as long-term superpowers, given the amount of data that they have to offer. I'm echoing. Okay, second point. I'll fix that. Oh, wait.
You keep going.
I know I'm interesting, but only once. Try to be interesting anyway. Okay, so if IoT was the first thing, and then there are pros and cons, but I think a lot of real potential or real positives out of that. The second thing was about the shrinking space for civil society. I was privileged to be asked to speak to a series of NGO leaders from Ecuador and Venezuela, 2 countries where our firm has worked extensively about this issue. And, you know, let's face it, around the world right now, and this is one of the things that has been alluded to, and I think you alluded to it, Barbara, as well, there's some real pressure on civil society from a number of governments and from a number of regional blocs. And so one of the questions is, how do we see ourselves in that debate? Is that one we want to participate in as business? And what does it mean for us? And how important is this? And you know, and we talked about the idea of Lisa, you mentioned the idea of security versus using security as a way to shrink the space for what is good on the internet. It was a very interesting conversation with these leaders because, you know, government is taking different roles in different countries. And while some of these, the sense that I get is that a lot of these are trial balloons too, to see what will work. And there are legitimate concerns about security, and yet there are very legitimate concerns on behalf of large parts of the global nonprofit NGO community that say, well, if we can't raise money internationally, if we don't have the ability to hold up, to keep ourselves safe online, if we can't communicate with our people and with our networks and our constituents, then that's a real problem. And that shrinks the space for democratic openness, and frankly, that shrinks the space for commercial openness. Because one of the big points that came out of our conversation, which was my third point, which is the role of the private sector as a potential partner for the nonprofit world, especially in states under stress. When you find that in point of fact, in an awful lot of instances, the companies themselves are facing some of the same challenges that the nonprofit community is facing. They have a lot of the same interests in transparency, good governance, in openness, in just the ability to go about their day-to-day work and to be able to interact with their constituents, their consumers. And importantly, as we move through the economy from a just product or technology-based economy to one that has at least some element of trust in it, trust as a part of your brand, trust as a part of your delivery, then nonprofits have something interesting to offer to the private sector. And I think one of the great things that came out of this IGF was the chance to sit down and talk with nonprofits about what it is, how are they talking to the private sector, how are they talking to government, and what do they think of themselves? Do they think of themselves as powerful? What are they offering? And in a lot of instances, their networks and their credibility are things that can be real assets for their interlocutors. And I thought that was an important realization and something important to think about, changing the frame. We think of ourselves in civil society often as being the weaker end, the going hand in hand and looking for money. And in fact, we have a lot more resources than we realize. That led to my fourth point, which was around cybersecurity. Cybersecurity was simultaneously an open and a closed part of my IGF experience. An open part because there were some conversations around cybersecurity, but a closed part in the sense that there's tremendous fear around cybersecurity as well. There's fear that cybersecurity is going to be used as a way of shutting down space. There's also fear in that a lot of these voices, whether they be general voices from the global south, whether they be user voices, whether they be nonprofit, civil society voices, these people are the least prepared to protect themselves. And it is clear that we as a community, if we're going to achieve the promise of the internet, and if private sector, governments, and civil society are going to work together, this is an area where we really need to come together to help some of the newer entrants into the online world. There's a tremendous fear around it. I think it's fair to say that around the world, an awful lot of nonprofits are, if not technophobic, at least techno-skeptic. Slow to adapt, concerned about what is out there, and yet there's tremendous capacity in the private sector, and there's tremendous capacity in some parts of the nonprofit world that can say, hey, we can help you with that. So let's come together, let's think about alliances and partnerships that might be able to make that a safer space and a more productive space. And the last thing, the last thing that I wanted to mention was this focus on employment. Someone else mentioned it earlier. I think that is and will continue to be, if not the single biggest issue, one of the single biggest issues that faces us going forward. There's tremendous amount of expectation around the net. If you look at all of the countries, for example, I participated in 2 or 3 of them when I was working with the World Bank, looking at Vision 2020 or Vision 2030 for different countries. They all contain an element of, we're going to have a software industry. We're going to get everybody wired. People are going to be participants in the digital economy. All of that depends on our ability to get employment out there. People need to be making money off of the web. It can't be a passive thing. It's not like it's great as a big library, but it's much more important as a big library that employs people or that allows them to employ themselves. We talked a lot about it. We had a great session on the SDGs that Marilyn organized. Marilyn's here. Congratulations on that one. And we talked a lot about the different SDGs. And as I was sitting there, and the comment that I made from the audience was, every single one of these SDGs keeps coming back to employment. we're gonna have hundreds of millions of people around the world who in the next 10 years are gonna be coming into the global economy. Just to give you a sense, 124 million new people just on the African continent are going to be aging into the ages where they're going to need to find work. Okay, we're going to have to find them work. The internet has to be a big part of that. We have to get organized working together around that. Part of that is going to be cybersecurity. Part of that's going to be training. Part of that may be IoT. But the focus has to be, in my opinion, very substantially, if we're going to reach these sustainable development goals on employment. And thanks so much.
Sounds like a workshop proposal.
I'm in, let's do it.
Sounds like a main.
Yeah.
We're going to get an actual project.
Even better.
Yeah, thank you so much for those insights. Now, your comment on the cybersecurity aspect, because I sat in a couple of workshops on cybersecurity, and what was really apparent was that the people who've been talking about cybersecurity talk amongst themselves as an expert topic, and everyone else is scared of what's going on there. And one of the recommendations that came out of that conversation was, well, so the cybersecurity people need to engage more and more into processes and platforms such as the IGF with that knowledge. So thanks so much for all of that.
We actually had an interesting conversation with a couple of cybersecurity experts that we know from ICANN world, and just getting them talking with people from some parts of the global south was already a bit of a revelation.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that we're going to have to try to do simultaneous to that is to build this sense of trust, because I think it is a fear that we have heard, and potentially even a legitimate fear, that as we're trying to get more people into the cybersecurity world, this is something they don't know. Having voices from within their community be part of that conversation, having nonprofits help them to get more knowledgeable. If they are a nonprofit, may be a really good way to go. And then there are ways to bring in many more experts that way.
Great, thank you so much. I'll turn it over to Dustin. And I know we still have Carolyn, and we want to make sure that there is open participation as well. So, the youth perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, David, for inviting me. I think it's really important and relevant that we included the youth perspective on this panel. I just noticed an increasing level of youth engagement and participation, and even perception on the end of the IGF community, as evidenced by the main session of shaping the future of internet governance. There are a number of really promising youth initiatives. One that stands out to me is the Youth Observatory in the Latin American region. I think they do a good job of mobilizing youth, having a solid presence, and actually producing some outcomes. They released a declaration on enabling access to empower young women to build a feminist internet governance model. So it's nice to see that they're not just youth kind of being siloed into their own little corner, but actually producing quality results. And there's also an increase in youth initiative related sessions. I think there were 5 or 6 that were specifically tailored towards youth engagement in the IGF and internet governance. And I think this is really important, because the people that are youth and young people right now, they're the first generation that really grew up not knowing what life was like without the internet. I think I was kind of on the cusp of that. It wasn't necessarily a huge part of my life growing up, but I knew what it was and I had it. But now, kids are on smartphones and tablets from the age of 5.
Or earlier.
Or earlier.
As a leaguer parent.
And I think there are important implications of that need to be addressed from their perspective. I'm personally glad that I didn't have a smartphone and social media until my later teen years, because my early teen years were documented and recorded, then I personally wouldn't be too thrilled about it. another thing is that, you know, there's a lot of talk about young people being the future, but really, especially in the technology industry, young people are the present. I mean, look at, for example, this fake news phenomenon. If you look at, Mark Zuckerberg is now no longer a youth, but when he developed Facebook, he was a youth. And if you look at some of the largest producers of fake news, you know, there's some teenagers in Macedonia. So, I mean, they're the ones affecting what's happening on the internet. So they need to be involved in this discussion. And another reason I think it's important is it's no longer, there's no longer this ability to avoid using technology. You know, a lot of people might say, oh, if you don't like it, don't use it. But if you're trying to be a productive member of society and you're going through school right now or early in your career, I didn't want to use a smartphone or social media. I'd basically be a sinking ship, you know? So I'm forced to use it. I'm forced to subject myself to surveillance and data collection and all the other risks of the internet. And I believe that the internet is a positive thing for society. But if I'm going to be forced to use it, then I want to be part of the discussion of how it's governed. And I think that the trends are heading in this direction based on the youth getting a main session in the IGF and more youth session organizers and speakers on panelists. But I think that it kind of parallels the gender issue we have, where there are a lot of youth involvement, but at times they are siloed and put onto, you know, there'll be 5 youth speakers, but they're all talking about youth issues. But then you go to the next panel and there's not a youth voice to be heard. It's just like when you sit through a group of panels, all men, and then you go to a gender balance panel and it's all women, and they get to talk about gender issues, not about the actual issues that they care about beyond the gender issues. And so I think that we need to find ways to get more youth involved on a deeper level. And I think this goes back to what Barbara said about finding ways to fund the travel so that the youth speakers who can't afford to make it to Bali or Geneva, yeah. So we can bring them to the table even though they don't yet have the means to do so themselves. And, you know, there's been an increase in these capacity building workshops that are preparing them for involvement in internet governance, like all these schools on internet governance. So it's important to let them apply that. I guess the technology just moves too fast and the impact is too great for them to wait their turn. And I also think that it's beneficial. Moving forward, I think there are a lot of barriers to keeping the internet free and open. And we need as many good, bright minds working on it as possible. And a lot of young people these days, it's more important for them to find a cause than to pursue a financially lucrative career. They want to find a cause that they care about and makes them happy. So we have a lot of people out there who are very bright and want to work on something they care about. So let's start getting into the schools and teaching them about why this is important. And they also bring a healthy energy. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of them, and one thing I've noticed is that they're not just excited to participate in the IGF, but they're excited to go back to their communities all over the world and build the capacity there. And that's something that we talk a lot about, is building capacity in local communities, and the youth want to go do that. One thing that we work on is at ICANN-Wiki, we have a large resource on all things ICANN and some internet governance related content, and we're working on translating that into Spanish, Swahili, Chinese, and Portuguese, and that's driven by the youth. They are coming to these events and they want to help, and they're making it happen. So So like I said, just continuing to build capacity, getting them started earlier, and reaching out to them in schools, funding their participation. We had a discussion in a session that I organized about whether funding these type of fellowships and stuff is a good idea. And ultimately, the conclusion we came to is that if we didn't have these, then we're leaving so many important and unique perspectives without a voice. And that's informing the internet governance discussion. So we need to not only maintain and continue them, but build on them. And I think an important thing to realize about this youth movement and all these youth movements is that they're not a homogeneous group. They're not a stakeholder group. They're united by their youth, and I guess if they had a core principle, it's maybe increasing youth engagement for their future. But they all have, you know, they come from business, they come from civil society, they come from government, and so there isn't one issue that is more important to the youth. I mean, access. If you're a youth in a developing country that has very limited access, then access is going to be more important to you. If you're using all these new technologies, well, security and privacy is going to be more important for you, you know. So I think that's just important to keep in mind. Yeah, and I think that it's nice to see the trend going in that direction, and I'd like to see some stuff with like what we're doing now, bringing the youth to the table, be implemented even outside of the IGF in other forms as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for this perspective on youth, and lots of recommendations there for the program next year as well. I'd like to turn now to Marilyn.
Thanks. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak briefly about the NRIs. I am going to make a couple of general comments because I think as I listen to many of the comments that are being made, I see that we have lost some of our historical understanding of things we have done at IGF USA. In 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012, we had youth speakers and workshops that were organized by young people for young people. We also had youth speakers on some of the main sessions. So it seems to me that one of the things that we want to do about IGF USA is to think about what we're hearing here in terms of taking stock, and also think about what we might want to take into planning for the IGF USA 2017. I want to focus for a couple of minutes on explaining a little bit about the NRIs. And at the far end of the table, there's a couple of pieces of information. One of them is what's called the scary timeline of internet governance meetings, or Marilyn Kate's travel schedule, one or the other. And you'll notice on that it includes the events that are taking place at the United Nations, both UNESCO and UNCTAD and ECOSOC, the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, and the International Telecommunications Union. And those are on there because internet governance is very much on the agenda at all of these organizations. And one of the things that I think sometimes we forget is that we fail to read all the relevant paragraphs in the Tunis agenda. And sometimes we begin to think that the Internet Governance Forum owns all discussions about internet governance. That is not what the Tunis agenda says. And in particular, I think it's important for us to focus on that now as we are moving into this 10-year period, because the linkage between the Sustainable Development Goals and internet governance are going to be increasingly focused on by the United Nations, by all of the regional UN organizations, and we are going to see a much heightened interest on the part of the UN bodies in asserting themselves and their functions back into internet governance, perhaps in ways we may not be totally satisfied with, because most of those organizations have very limited mechanisms to enable stakeholders to actively participate. Even when you can attend a meeting, you often cannot speak. And even though we have been successful in opening up some of the consultation processes, the fact of the matter is that it's a very short list of organizations, individuals, and entities that submit thoughtful comments into those processes and work with the range of governments that they need to work with to help make change at a national level, which brings me to the NRIs. We began in 2006 organizing preparatory sessions before each of the MAG meetings. They were open to everyone. Becky Burr and I co-organized. We had about 60 or 70 people, and we were very fortunate from the beginning. We have been very unique as a national initiative because we have always had a wide range of different government participants. Not a single government agency, and no government agency supervises the others and tries to speak for them. But we had, for instance, from the beginning, the FTC, the FCC, the CIO office of the DoD, we had Commerce, we had State, we had also OSTP. So we've had a very broad and diverse experience, and that, I think, is something that makes this national initiative unique and should serve as a role model to others. Too many of the national initiatives are limited to, particularly the new ones, they're limited to participation from only the regulator in the country, the developing country, or the Ministry of Communication. As the SDGs are much more important, we need to be thinking about how we're going to influence and integrate the voice of the rest of the government agencies at a national level into a dialogue with stakeholders. We can talk about public policy at a global level. I seem to specialize in traveling around the world and doing that, but we can't actually change a national law unless we are able to work on ground and bring the stakeholders together with their governments. So the coordinators of the national and regional IGFs began meeting together informally at lunchtime at the open consultations. Changatai and I coordinated those. Then in 2011, we actually began substantive coordination sessions at the various IGFs. In the beginning of 2015, there were 37 national and regional IGFs. By the October, there were 43. At the meeting last year, the substantive meeting that Anya Ginkgo and I organized with the NRI coordinators, we made a commitment to double the number of the national and regional IGFs in the next 2 years. They're now 76. And we have added 3 new sub-regionals in parts of the world that I was actually quite surprised about. Central Asia. We'll be adding a couple of others as well. And we also have 8 more that have come forward to propose with the help of the Secretariat. I serve as this year and last year as the substantive coordinator working with the IGF Secretariat focal point, Anya Ginkgo. So interestingly enough, they are now involved in trying to understand what it takes to be sustainable as a NRI. We're rich here in that we have think tanks, we have businesses, we have NGOs, we have academics who are taking a look at global policy. Many of the other countries do not have those kinds of resources. So the thing we're trying to do, working from the Secretariat outward, is to begin to try to identify in each country additional resources and partners that can help to work with the NRIs. Many of the NRIs meet the basic criteria of having at least 3 of the stakeholder groups, but they have to end up with all 5. And we are very pushed sometimes to find, in particular, businesses that are interested. We're doing a much better job of being able to find NGOs, and particularly NGOs that are engaged in development, that are interested in cooperating. But finding businesses in a country like Burkina Faso or Togo can be a real challenge. If we expect to change how governments look at internet governance, we have to do it at a national level, which means we have to begin to take messages and deliver on some real meaningful changes that helps the government to understand why it's in their interest to be a part of a multi-stakeholder process. We're lucky now that we have seen the bloom of the WSIS Forum beginning to attract participation from more ministers and from others who are coming together at that May forum in Geneva. And that is beginning to build a cadre of interested new ministers. Let me just say that I don't know if Megan Richards is still on Zoom, but if we think about what we might do better ourselves, I also want to mention that in the early days, we had members of Congress who came and participated, and Hill staff who came and participated with us. And perhaps one thing we might want to think about from the IGF USA is to think about returning to the idea that we would volunteer to do some congressional staff briefings. What is internet governance? What are the SDGs? Why do they matter? Why do we care about multi-stakeholder engagement? We've got a whole new group of incoming members of Congress and new staff, and we'll have a major set of changes here. And I think we've kind of lost that push, something that we used to do very actively. So let me put that on the table. Secondly, I want to point out to people that there's a document over there, a flyer about the IGF Support Association. And the IGF Support Association was founded specifically to raise funds to support the national and regional IGFs. We only support the developing country IGFs because of the UN definition. So the WEOG countries, including the US, are not eligible to, we give small grants. I am a member of the executive committee, the board. We give small grants of $2,000 to the nationals and $3,500 to the sub-regionals or regionals. Very often we also provide speakers to them, usually remotely, to try to help them generate the interest to get started. So I would just say, again, if we believe that everything we've said so far is important, and we believe that we can contribute to an open internet that is secure, resilient, and sustainable, we've got to figure out what we can do as the IGF USA, I think, and as a broader community, not only to strengthen the IGF itself, but also to think about what we can do to generate more support into the Secretariat, to the Trust Fund, to help stabilize the amount of work that they need to do. Every suggestion that's been made here about improvements has been made over and over and over and over. But we lack the funding to be able to curate the information. We lack the funding to be able to bring those interested attendees and speakers. So perhaps as we go further into thinking about what we can do, we should be thinking about being a role model.
mic.
Thanks so much, Marilyn, for sharing the thoughts there, as well as some of the broader context. The work that you've been doing on the NRI has been tremendous in terms of enabling the IGF to reach one of its goals and challenges, which is being more inclusive, an inclusive forum. At this point, I'd like to open it to the audience. There are a couple of other people here who did attend the IGF as well. Would really, really welcome your perspectives on and your takeaways from the IGF. So just want to open that up. Yes,
Carolyn, can I add something? I'm not sure if you can hear me. It's Megan
yes,
speaking.
Yes, we can hear you. Why don't you go ahead, and then we'll start a queue in the room.
Okay,
Paul,
thanks.
can you
Just
help us manage the queue?
I will, yes.
yeah, thanks. I can't figure out how to make the photo work, and I can't figure out how to answer the question. Someone asked me if I wanted to jump in on the mention about the Congress people, I suppose you call them now. Although now that Trump is coming in, I suppose they're congressmen again. But sorry, I couldn't resist that. No, just that one thing that we see very much in Europe, and
Pardon me, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's Megan Richards speaking. I can't see.
Yes, hi,
I'm on the list of participants. I can't tell. Sorry. Anyway, what I was going to say is that the importance of participation of parliamentarians. We find that this is particularly useful and important. At the IGF, we have always had members of the European Parliament, and we used to also be able to have quite a few national parliamentarians participating. And I think making sure that they're involved and know what's going on, even just briefing them on what's happening, I think really makes a big difference. And we've noticed with them a growing and increasing interest and participation, not just because the meetings are in exotic places, but really because the digital economy is becoming so important, and it's becoming so important to policy issues. So I can only encourage you to do as much as you possibly can in that respect. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Megan, for your comment. We'll move to...
Yes, in the room now.
So, I'm sorry.
Yes. Thank you. I'm Sarah Zaharisova from DIPLO and the Geneva Internet Platform. First of all, thank you for organizing this. It has been very useful. And I myself attended the IGF, and I just like to bring up a few points. First of all, and it has been noted here a couple of times, that there have been over 200 sessions. So for any individual attending the IGF, it's humanly impossible to follow, and also to be able to come up with some takeaways. To answer questions, what are actually the main trends that can be identified from the IGF? It's really difficult if you just randomly pick some sessions, which you might do because you're a speaker or because topics of your interest. So something that we've tried to do for the second time, we did it last year, not 2 years ago, in João Pessoa, and last year, in Guadalajara, was provided just-in-time reporting from all of the sessions happening at the IGF. It's something that we partnered with the IGF Secretariat, with ICANN and ISOC. And what we try to do is to actually help both the people on the ground and people online to have a session report available within 2-3 hours, in ideal case, after the session finished. Every day in the morning, having a summary of the day and some takeaways of that. And then 48 hours after the IGF ended, we prepared like a final report, which I brought a few copies, and I will leave them here, where we again try to assess and provide some outlooks. And many of the trends that you have identified here, as you as the speakers, are the trends that we found were those that were kind of the hot issues. So this is something that I invite you to take advantage of, especially if you want to zoom out, but also zoom in to some particular sessions. It was quite a big exercise, and I know that many of you have really supported us in this endeavor, so thank you for that. My second point, there was some comments here about the more innovative aspects of this year IGF, and because we at the Geneva Internet Platform work quite closely with the Swiss government, I know that there are some plans and efforts to really make the Geneva IGF even more innovative, not just when it goes to the format of the session. So let's hope that this is something that will answer some of the doubts that have been expressed here. My last point, just because Diplo is quite active in capacity development, so thank you for bringing it up. I think that capacity development must go beyond just this travel support, let's say, for selected individuals to come to the IGF. There have been many sessions at the IGF which have been tagged with the capacity development tag. One aspect of the discussions that I've been missing, though, was again the funding situation, because capacity development is expensive. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort if there is to be an impact. And again, the questions like just with the travel support to the IGF kind of remains to be the elephant in the room. That's it. Thank you.
We have one person online in the queue. Can we go to online and then come back? Well, then go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, two finger thing. First, thank you for mentioning the just-in-time reporting. I think it was valuable, but also thank you particularly for noting the innovative sessions. I neglected to mention that I think there were several people, particularly that made a huge effort in putting together what we call the innovative sessions, the flash sessions that took place, and the unconference that there was at the end of the last day that pulled together sort of crowdsourcing sort of discussions, and I think those were great innovations for this year, and it was really fun. Thank you. So thank you for mentioning that.
Okay, we have one online, Bach.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Barely, just speak loud, please.
Hi, this is Bach Kavizjana from Columbia University's Freedom of Expression Initiative. I really like what Andrew did with, listing kind of key issues or takeaways from the IGF. And I'm wondering if the government representatives and, some of the other civil society speakers could do something similar and highlight, what in their mind were the key takeaways from the sessions, or the thematic topics, rather than programmatic or stuff like that. Thanks.
Good response in the room.
Thank you very much for that question. This is Barbara Warner, presenting a business perspective on it. I think from our point of view, I think important substantive takeaways were that we produced a workshop session that provided some very concrete recommendations in terms of how we proceed with bridging the gender digital gap. Also, too, I think an important substantive takeaway, at least for the business community, was some very concrete suggestions and brainstorming and ideas in terms of the whole jobs creation, employment ramifications of the increasing digitalization of the economy. So I feel that there were important substantive takeaways pertaining to UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as this parallel body of inquiry that is going on now in the B20 and the OECD and a couple of other international forums concerning the transformation, the digital transformation of the economy. So I offer that answer to your question. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Barbara. So for the queue in the room, I'm sorry I don't know your name. I've got the lady in the white, Judith, you, Mike, and yeah. So we've got 5, 6 people in the room. And why don't we start?
Hi, Carolyn from Organization of American States. It's a very brief comment. We had split the team up to do remote moderating, and then 2 of our team members went. The comment I wanted to make to the organizers is that in future, that remote moderating can actually be remote. When I had logged in thinking I could have done the remote moderating from the office in DC, I realized that someone had to go into the office, speak to the person who was in the room, take it over from the person in the room, and that's not how we had divided the team. We had 2 panel speakers, and I was supposed to stay in DC and be the moderator. So I would just recommend that in future, we had sat down and we did the whole session, the 2-hour session online to learn the platform and everything, and then we couldn't use the resources. So I would just recommend in future if we could actually have remote moderating be remote moderating, that the moderator could actually not have to be in the venue. It helps a lot in terms of the travel support and being able to stay.
I'm not the technical person, but maybe Magna might follow up with that to see if
Yes, I had to send emails, and when I realized it wasn't possible, I sent a WhatsApp to Barbara. I was like, you guys are on your own.
Okay.
And then Carolyn had to do it for our session.
Got it. Just to make sure we get it, can you send one of us an email? Yeah. That would be great.
Yeah,
Judith?
it's Judith Hellestein, and Carrie, I actually can comment on you because I'm working with some others in the accessibility community, which is what we use the remote moderation a lot, on creating some kind of manual. So that feedback is extremely helpful because they are always looking at how they can do remote moderation the best. And so we also had a lot of challenges, except the people who will had the problems were expert in this, and so they figured out solutions. But so if you could just send that to me, I can also make sure it gets to the right person. But I also was on a panel on the IGF, and I thought it was very well. It was on the trade in the internet, and thinking we got so many people who were so interested in it. Too bad we were in a room that was far out and no one could find us. But I also loved the idea of the flash sessions. I thought they were very helpful in small new topics. I did like the ideas. I do think, like Andrew, we need to figure out how we could make topics that are similar on a different times so that you can cover some more areas. There were several topics that were similar that were on the same time. And with the location being very separate from each other, you couldn't just leave one, go to another, because they were very far apart from each other. And so I
in and out of sometimes.
Yeah, and hard to get.
That we're standing remotely, we couldn't
Right, and
gracefully exit.
yes, you would have, if you wanted to do that, you had to stand near the back of the door to get over. And I think I did like the idea of they had workshop rooms which you can actually hear people coming in, and we didn't have to use the microphone, the headsets. So I thought that went really well. Because sometimes you just want to come in and listen quickly to see if it's the right session. And that's difficult when you have to get a headset and that type of thing. So I thought that went really well as also the conversations. And I was helping out the CLDP group that Lisa mentioned. And we were working with some of our panelists from Afghanistan and Pakistan who were on panels for some of the first or second times of them, and helping to represent them and helping to make sure that the panels they were on, people came to. Because they had organized one panel on tech women. And so we helped distribute invitations to make sure that important people who they wanted to hear the information could actually be there and knew about it, because it won't get lost. So go on.
Yeah, so my name is Courtney Raj. I'm with the Committee to Protect Journalists and with the Academic Network GigaNet. And we organized some sessions, both the formal panels, and then was invited to do a flash session. I unfortunately wasn't there because I got bronchitis. But I think that the issue of the speakers and how that is set up, because, you know, unfortunately I was one of those people who became a person who wasn't able to go, and then also finding people to replace myself on the sessions I was supposed to be on. It would be helpful in the review of the MAG if you're able to put in, you know, potentially more speakers. They want 5 for a panel, but you know that you don't know what their funding situation is or whatever. So I think being able to be more, you know, flexible in that sort of thing would be very helpful. Also, I understand that we want a multi-stakeholder approach, but I think we need to get rid of this idea that means you have to have one person from civil society, one person from business, one person from government, da-da-da. As a civil society person, one thing that we would like to do is to actually have a discussion among civil society groups about specific issues that government and business representatives are there to listen to and engage with. And that the format and kind of way that the assessment is done does not facilitate that. So it's very hard to say have a session about internet censorship around the world, and you want to talk from the civil society perspective to, you know, the governments and the tech community. But again, that probably wouldn't get accepted because of the assessment, the way it's done. Similarly, it seems like there is this effort to get in different types of
sessions, roundtables, getting away from just the panel discussion. But the way that you have to submit the information and the conceptualization makes that very difficult, right? Yeah, so you know that. And I think also—
helpful to hear specific examples.
Yeah, so, and I think it is important to have new things, but there is also important to provide an opportunity to have follow-on discussions. So for example, we organized a session on the press freedom implications of internet governance a couple of years ago in Turkey, and it was hugely attended, standing room only. Want to do follow-up on that, and these develop, but I feel like there is and kind of this idea everything needs to be new versus looking at how ongoing debates develop, right? And SDGs, we should keep on that for the next 9 years because they're going to be an issue. So those were a few of the things. I would also say there was a lack of responsiveness from the organizers of the lightning sessions and some of the other sessions, for last minute inability to participate, whether there was ability to participate remotely, that sort of thing. So I think we could also address the issue of panelists not being able to attend at the last minute if we have better responsiveness to find alternative ways to participate then in person.
I think that there is
Real quick. All the things that you say make sense. I would be really concerned about having the size of the panels that we currently have is already very large. Having a larger panel seems to me to be going in the wrong direction.
not a panel.
Right, exactly. So some of the best sessions that I attended were ones that broke the frame, where they had 3 presenters, and then we broke out, for example, in one of them into 3 smaller groups and had conversations. This is especially important for people who are not native English speakers who might be otherwise really intimidated from taking up the mic and asking a question. The other thing that was nice about it is by having only 3 people who are actually there to facilitate the conversation, there was much more time for conversation. And rather than having everybody get through and having to give their 5 minutes and no time for a response, there was actually a fair amount of dialogue. I thought it was one of the strongest sessions that I was at.
Sorry, I need to raise one more thing. It's a big issue. It's going to be in Switzerland next year. And as somebody who previously organized delegations of civil society members from countries that would, the EU would rather not have enter, we have to look at that as a major issue. What is the Swiss government going to do to enable people from Pakistan, from, parts of Africa, the Middle East to enter and get on that, urgently?
Good point, Courtney. Then, sorry, Liesl again. I just wanted to finger here quickly on the session type formats and flexibility that you mentioned. I think there is great intent by the MAG members, outgoing, previous, outgoing, incoming, to accommodate various types of formats. And I think in our evaluations, if it was somehow expressed in the workshop proposal, it was noted and scored, I think, generally speaking. But one of my biggest concerns with the workshop proposal process is my first year in the MAG was that the proposal format that you filled out did not address the criteria we were supposed to judge against, we were supposed to evaluate against. And so that's one of my biggest hopes for the just the proposal format change that we can hopefully do for next year to capture that.
So I know that we have 3 other people in queue in the room. Do we have any more online?
One's online.
And 1 more online. We are over time. We'll run this as long as people are interested in having the conversation. One other thing I do also want to ask is for people who have comments and recommendations for the MAG, Liesl, Mike, I'm looking at the 2 of you because you guys are MAG members. If there are comments and recommendations, do you want people to send them to David or to you? How would you, for additional recommendations from?
Or if you want to collect them here, how are you?
No, I'm just looking for it because there are people who have.
There's two things. First off, there is an actual process.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't you?
The Internet Governance Forum is doing a evaluation. I think the deadline is January 29th. 22nd. There were some great comments in the room that people would take the time to go to the IGF website, click on the link about how they can comment and improve next year's IGF. But also Marilyn, myself, David, Liesel all would be very interested, not only in how IGF could be improved, but how we could also make IGF USA work more effectively. So there's a lot of ways to weigh in. Just real quickly, I've heard some great comments about the details of logistics, some great comments on what happened in Guadalajara, and some comments about going forward. I'm going to try to do a quick hit on each one. First off, great suggestions on curating, making this incredibly valuable content available to a larger audience. But I think we need to think in IGF about how to do things that can't be done in the normal panel discussion format. So many people can just tune in and hear a good panel discussion online. They don't need to go somewhere to do that. What was great about IGF this year was we did have some very powerful sessions that could only be done in person. If you haven't had a chance, watch the video from the Internet Society session. We did a policy slam. Took the whole room, broke it into 5 different groups. Each group had 10 minutes to come up with 3 great ideas that they then shared 30 seconds at a time. There was so much energy and so many ideas in the room, and that's what we need to think more about doing. It's not easy to convey that in a video, but just watch the last 20 minutes of the Internet Society session. 2 quick comments in response to the question from Columbia about, okay, what was new this year, what was different? I was struck by the fact of how subdued this IGF was. It was partly because people weren't all picking on the United States, partly because of the ICANN decision, partly because of the decision of the American people on election day. But it wasn't a sense that things are in crisis and we need to fight about things. But the other thing that struck me was we didn't have a lot of discussion about how new technologies and new business models are really fundamentally changing the internet. And we've never been at a point like this. Things are happening faster than ever before, and yet almost all the discussion was all about the things we were doing 5 years ago and even 10 years ago. We weren't talking about radical new breakthroughs. There were a couple sessions. There was one on new blockchain technologies and the like. There were some things that kind of got us outside the normal debates, but somehow we're going to have to bring new ideas in. So my radical idea to the next MAG, because I'm stepping off of the MAG, is that we actually allow every MAG member to list 3 panels that they would love to see accepted and give them the power to pick one. And their vote determines that that panel is on there. And they list 3 because other people might list the same one. But that way you'd get the chance to get the radical new ideas that most people don't understand. And that's been a challenge. The other thing I would say just globally, and this is going back not just to the start of the IGF, but to what you might think of as the first version of IGF, which was the INET series. The global INETs, which the Internet Society started in the early 90s, brought together the global internet community, which was much smaller in 1992. And we discussed all these same issues. But the big difference was at those meetings, you did have a better interplay between the technology community and the business community and the government. And we're losing that. We're losing the ability to really look at how new technologies are changing everything. So thanks for letting me ramble on, and thanks for a great discussion. We had a lot of great comments, and I hope this will be viewed by many people in the future online.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Mr. Garland?
Thanks. Thanks. This is Garland McCoy with Technology Education Institute, and I've been to 10, we've done 10 workshops of IGF, and just a couple of quick pieces. I love Maryland's travel map calendar every year, but it was once again disturbing that of the 29 meetings, you've got 9 in Geneva, fully a third, half in the EU countries, 7 in the US. So, you know, it's the same sort of circuit, if you will. I had the pleasure this year of partnering with the Cuban delegation in co-hosting my workshop, along with a number of other great groups. And I thought that was outstanding. I've always tried to focus on bringing in using my workshops as an opportunity to bring in new players. In Vimeo a number of years back, that's a major player in developing countries, and bringing out access. And this year with Cuba, the Union of Informatic Professionals was great. They invited me to come into and give a speech at their ICT conference, and were very welcoming. And then were great partners in the workshop that I did on the civil society and business private sector working together to with obviously ICT and the internet to address the UN strategic development goals. One thing though that I would was a great panel. Marilyn helped me with it. It was a good collaborative effort. One thing though that continues to disturb me. Bill Woodcock, I don't used to do this. I equate this with him, but I'm sure others were doing it as well. But this sort of tutorial, because I went around to several of the workshops and everything, and it's just stunning how people are not challenging what government officials are saying, or what, you know, for example, the Brazilian government has passed legislation that bans deep packet inspection. Well, you can't have a functioning internet without deep packet inspection. It just simply can't. The plumbing can't be done, because you have to look for anomalies through this process in order to protect how the plumbing, how the packets will move around. So the fact that they have an internet functioning in Brazil means that they're doing deep packet inspection. So, yeah, and which was acknowledged by some of the players. Things like the right to be forgotten, localization of data. It doesn't, if we're losing it if we don't have some mechanism where there's some basic tutorial going on. You can't have a more, I don't think, productive discussion, for example, on security issues that was been brought up here. If people don't understand what's possible, what's not possible, how, in my parlance, how the plumbing works, how the digital post office works, right? The DNS system, this sort of thing. So maybe a little bit more of that built in at the beginning would be something to consider, because it just seems to me an awful lot of waste of time when people are not, you know, they're going on false assumptions. You're having these workshops or whatever, and you come out of it and you say, well, but you know, they've spent an hour or an hour and a half or whatever, and on a topic that it just defies the way things operate, right? You know, they're talking over here, and the actual functioning happens over here, and the two don't hook up. So finally, I would really love, and I keep beating this horse, I know, but it did come up again here with some of the folks discussing this. In the multi-part of the multi-stakeholder, I do think that if, and as Marilyn and others have said, if we could get more folks that are outside of our playpen, if you will, the hotel folks, the engineering folks in Caterpillar, the folks that understood that you don't have to go in and explain what the internet is, because they already understand it. They already have it baked into their global supply chain. But they could help you with the tourist minister. They could help you with the finance minister if it's Visa. They could help you with, so they can start helping you evangelize and bring in additional private sector players in these meetings and help emphasize that part. So That's it.
I'm told we have 2 speakers left and then we're going to wrap. So there's Renata online and then Robert, is that okay? Is that okay? Renata first. Renata, can you go ahead?
Hi, everyone. Good morning from sunny Brazil. It's very good to be right after so many comments, so many interesting comments about IGF. And also, I would highly commend the work of IGF USA. You guys are doing a great job. But I would focus my comments on multicultural support and long-term support. I had a big problem with chairs. In the BPF gender session, we had folks, we had so many people that they at one point, everybody sat on the floor because it was such a popular session. And to me, this shows that the intersessional work is very important. So the work we do all over the year to prepare for IGF. IGF USA is a community that it's very interesting how you bring so many perspectives to the table. So I think this should be encouraged. And also to bring in multicultural support, what I call is trying to understand better the folks that gravitate within your IGF at the booths, for instance, at the village. We took a long time explaining to people on our native language, in Portuguese, for instance, what the booth was. Like in the dynamic coalition booths, we had this amazing initiative of research, of surveys and all. And I think just one small explanation in the languages would be very interesting. And speaking about Brazil and the Portuguese-speaking attendees, we are very different among ourselves, and we have many different focus on the IGF, including youth. And it was very important to see that we had places for each one of those groups to attend. Brazil is going through a big change right now. Its new bills were a point of attention in the closing ceremony. But I think we need to go deeper than that. I think we need to start to build a debate with different cultural groups. Participation of Afghanistan and Pakistan was also fantastic. And you really need to push this forward. Thanks.
Okay, to Robert, and then Jolly's got a quick comment.
Great. My name is Robert Guerra. Sorry for coming a bit late. Just a little bit about myself because I missed a round of introductions. I'm a special advisor on internet governance to Counterpart International and also participated at the IGF as a member of the ICANN Security and Stability Advisory Committee. Since I'm towards the end, I'm going to try to be as quick as possible. I think first, thank everyone for putting this together. It's always great to have this. And I helped organize 2 main activities at the IGF, and I'll talk a little bit about them, but very briefly. One, I'd like to thank Andrew and others. I put together with the colleagues at Counterpart and USAID, a delegation of internet experts from Ecuador and Venezuela. And we had well over 50 bilateral meetings during the IGF, in the sense more not really taking advantage of all the sessions during the IGF, but the great expertise of the people that are there to be able to raise some of the issues, have some of the dialogue, and have some follow-up. And so in regards to a couple things that were talked about here, I just wanted to comment on quickly. I organized a session on cybersecurity, and one of the outcomes out of that is that, to echo what was said earlier, it's really important to engage the tech security cyber investigator community as well. And we did a session that brought together the IRRs, cyber investigators, and the FBI. And one of the successes to our panel is that we had folks from the FBI participating remotely because at the last minute they couldn't come. And to the comment that was made is I think if you prepare and have a sense that, yes, there are always going to be speakers that are going to drop off and have a backup plan available, then I knew that there was virtual participation. And so we could get someone in from Quantico instead of having someone physically come.
I think something in regards to the virtual engagement that would be very helpful going forward is that one addition that was very helpful this year is to have bookable bilateral rooms, and that were very helpful because you could organize meetings with people. The one thing that was missing is those bilateral rooms did not have virtual participation engagement. And it would have been great to have a screen where people who you want to have bilateral meetings with, but they're people that aren't there, could be brought into the conversation. If the technology and the infrastructure is there, that's a way to really engage it. Something else in terms of virtual engagement that we did as a delegation is that we had an organized back channel that we were constantly kind of telling people where they were, providing feedback on the sessions. That's been proposed, and some of the NGOs and some of the other groups do that in a very ad hoc basis, bring out a way that that can be fed into the social reporting that takes place, and the organization for the MAG could be particularly helpful, particularly when things come up. That's a rapid response kind of mechanism. In regards to the capacity development, I think it's very important to think about not only capacity development during the IGF, but what happens before, during, and after. And the real important aspect of virtual engagement, it's really costly to bring people to an IGF. People want to be involved, people want to learn and want to participate. It'd be great if you can bring them, but if you can't, if their virtual presence can be felt at the meeting and during the training, that's equally as important. And I would be very keen to follow up with folks here in regards to that. A couple of takeaways that was mentioned by the folks at Columbia, an issue that I wasn't as aware of that came up from this group, particularly the group from Ecuador, and we had a great connection with a lot of folks from the private sector, is the issue of DMCA takedowns and the abuse that was taking place in the part of the Ecuadorian government, that they're abusing the process to take down content that's critical because they've copyrighted the image of the president and they've copyrighted the seal of the government. So when anyone leaks documents, then that's used. And it was great to speak with officials from the US government, from state, NTIA, RIAA, and others, saying this affects us too, and this abuse of the system is equally a problem for us, and ways going forward. And there's a consultation on DMCA that's taking place. And so there are issues that folks may not think about where there's a commonality. And so it was really helpful. Some of the folks from Ecuador and Venezuela are actually monitoring and following the session. And so it's great that this type of meeting, and I would say that other debrief sessions should also be open because it's a perspective that gets shared. So just three things in terms of good things and a bad thing. So the bilateral rooms was great. Providing a space for meetings and engaging and adding a virtual element would be great. A good thing that it's a pity that Courtney, I think, is left is the Swiss government does have subsidized rates for NGOs available and accommodation. There are special facilities that they have. They have to be booked in advance, and it brings the rate down to under like $40 or 40 francs a night. And so working with them and providing a facilitation of logistical coordinators, I think, would be great. And one rant I had during the Guadalajara IGF was the mariachi DDoS. Loud music that takes place or loud things in sessions where people are meeting. And so I would really be keen that when planning takes place at the venue, if there's a space where people are meeting, you know, it's great to have cultural events, and music is great and free drinks are great. But if the music level gets so high that you can't meet, is an issue. So again, thank you, and sorry for taking up all the time, and to the next speaker. Thank you.
To Jolly online.
Okay, so we actually lost your picture, so but people are looking at me. I hope you enjoy that. I wanted to first address the people at Columbia. I hope you know that there's an active Internet Society chapter in New York, and you can come and talk to us, and we'll be very happy to do events with you. But to get on to like the balance of remote participation versus local, I shot a thing late last year, Inbox Awesome conference, and they had the guy who was the founder of Trello, which is about collaboration. And he said something. He said that they had a system within their company that they realized that whenever they had a meeting and people were remote participants, they were always second class. And so they had a system. So if anybody was remote, everybody remote. So they all went back to their desks. So instead of being in the conference room and everybody talked remote. And I think it's something that you have to think about more. And, you know, as the earlier remark about, well, you should have a remote moderator, I think that the policy of having the remote moderator in the room, so at least the remote participants are in there in the room, able to put their hand up and wave, is a very good thing. I don't think you should lose that. I think that you should think more about, you know, as an alternative to everybody meeting up, to doing more things where everybody is remote and you have meetings like this. With DC, we're experimenting with a new format, the Internet Policy Forum, which is David's idea, where we're actually having simultaneous events in New York and DC, where we're both remote to each other. So there's a kind of balance there. So there's a lot of more ways to think about doing these things. So that's that. And then the last topic I'll talk about is transcripts. Now, I actually recorded transcripts so that I could post them at the end of the day, because nobody else does that. And it is, in fact, the best way to keep up with what's going on is to have all the transcripts running, because then you can just go and like page back and find what was said, so you can actually follow, you know, the 10 threads at once and kind of search even on keywords within the transcripts and then find out what somebody said, or, you know, or on speakers. And the fact that those transcripts are not available at the end of the day, oh, we've got to wait and they've got to be corrected and there's weeks and pass and everything, is not a satisfactory way of doing things. People should be able to come out of the meeting, go and say, okay, click here and see the transcript of the meeting I just listed, click through it, okay, off to the next thing. So transcript should be better presented and more accessible. Okay, that's me.
Thank you, Jolly. And with that, we're going to close this meeting. I want to thank our gracious hosts once again and all our participants. I want to urge you all to get involved with ISOC-DC. We have some interesting things coming up. As Jolly mentioned, we're going to have our first joint event with the Internet Policy Forum with the DC and New York chapters. It'll be on January 18th at 6 p.m. At American University in DC, and at the Grubhub Center in New York. We're going to be covering news feeds, algorithms, ethics, and content moderation in light of recent developments. We'll also be having monthly happy hours and monthly breakfasts. Our website is ISOC-DC.org. If you look today, ignore that one. The new one will be launched early next week. We're very excited about that. And planning for the 2017 IGF USA will begin at the end of January and beginning of February. We urge you all to actively participate. Thank you all for coming. And thank you all for the wonderful comments and insightful discussion.